Hello and welcome to RWR Plays TEW 2020. This is chapter 41, and today we're bringing you the go home episode of Nitro and Saturday Night ahead of Starrcade, the penultimate episode of 2001. Thank you for joining me. If you've enjoyed this series up to this point, please give us a follow and you can continue along with the rest of the series. And if you enjoy the video today, please give it a like as well. That's really helpful. Now, before we get into the meat of today's episode, let's do a little recap of the TV taping that took place on the last show. We saw three new number one contenders established, with the great Sasuke and Kaz Hayashi winning the final of the mini tournament to determine the next challengers for the Cruiserweight Tag Team title, and they'll get their title shot this week. We've got Billy Kidman winning a three-way match to book his place at Starrcade opposite Rey Mysterio Jr. for the Cruiserweight title, and Lance Storm won a four-way match, meaning that he will now challenge his partner at Starrcade, Mike Awesome, for the US title. Also, last time we saw footage from the official press conference for the main event of Starrcade, where Booker T will defend the WCW title against Scott Steiner. We saw Scott's brother Rick being called out by Bill Goldberg, but Rick wasn't in the building, and then he called into the show to taunt Goldberg, promising he would be in attendance for Nitro this week. Another match was booked for Starrcade as Eddie Guerrero challenged Jeff Jarrett to face him. Later in the night, the bout was confirmed as having been booked by Eric Bischoff. The American Mavericks complained about being the most winning team of 2001, but having not been given a chance to fight for the tag titles and challenge Sting and Ric Flair to put their title shot on the line on this week's Nitro. And on Saturday night, we saw Angel Orsini win the penultimate match in the women's title round robin, putting her atop the table with just one more match, Jillian Hall versus Jazz, to take place this week. And what I'm going to do in a moment is show you the women's round robin table. So yeah, as promised, here is the table. Unfortunately, on TEW 2020, I don't know if this has been changed in TEW 9, but in TEW 2020, they don't order them by points, so you kind of have to look at it in a bit of a strange way. But ultimately, here you can see Angel Orsini has 15 points. Jazz has 13, but Jazz still has that one match this week against Jillian Hall. So what she needs to do is win the match, and she will be the winner of the women's title round robin and, of course, women's champion. So let's get to this week's episode of Nitro. Now, as you can see, we are in Washington, in Reese Court, in, I don't know where in Washington that is. Washington State, of course, not Washington, D.C., which means we're in the Northwest for this particular show. And we start with the Cruiserweight Tag Team title match as Air Raid defend against Great Sasuke and Kaz Hayashi. And in the bout that had decent wrestling but didn't have much heat, Air Raid defeat Sasuke and Hayashi in 13 minutes and 56 seconds when AJ Styles pins Kaz Hayashi. Air Raid make defense number one of the Cruiserweight Tag Team titles. And Great Sasuke carried the match in terms of in-ring performances, 74 from him, Kaz a 55, AJ Styles a 53, Air Paris a 48, but a really good segment rating of 72 to start the show. And this is much more what we're looking for from the Cruiserweight Tag division than what we've seen in the past. I think this has got to be the best Cruiserweight Tag Team match we've seen so far, so that's really encouraging. Next, we go backstage. Tony Schiavone is stood between the members of Team Canada, Mike Awesome and Lance Storm, 6 days before the pair face one another at Starrcade. Schiavone asks Awesome how he feels about having to go up against his partner on the show, and Awesome says that actually it's pretty cool. They've had a massive year in 2001 and now they get to do battle on the biggest stage in the calendar. Storm agrees with Awesome and says that the match will be a really competitive contest and that he hopes the best man wins. Awesome says that the best man will win, just like he did the last time they faced each other. And Storm says he'll ignore that comment, seeing as Awesome has spent the last 7 months trying his best to not be forced to face him again. Awesome tells Storm that's funny, and they'll see him in the ring in 6 days and then walks off. So segment rating here of 62. Obviously, Mike Awesome and Lance Storm kind of building up to their Starrcade match. Their previous match, of course, came in the US title tournament. The semi-final match was Mike Awesome versus Lance Storm. That was at the Big Bang. And of course, Awesome went on to win the whole tournament. Next, Bam Bam Bigelow faces Barry Windham in a singles match. Windham gets the victory in 5 minutes and 38 seconds when Bigelow was disqualified after Kanyon ran in and attacked Windham. A segment rating here of 53, which is surprisingly decent. Bigelow still actually pretty handy performer, but Windham I mean, he is really on his last legs here. I got a note from the road agent to basically reduce the length of this from 7 minutes because apparently Wyndham is not capable of going that long. So, yeah, I think we may be coming to the end of the usefulness of Barry Windham on the roster, quite frankly. After the match, Canyon ran to the ring and he and Bigelow attack Wyndham. DDP and Kendall Wyndham then run to help Barry. Chronic and Shane Douglas then also turn up and attack DDP and Kendall Wyndham. So, segment rating here 56 as a bunch of wrestlers get into a big brawl ahead of Starrcade on Sunday. Next, another singles contest sees Bobby Eaton against Jester, and this one's won by Jester in 8 minutes 22 when Prodigy helps him. Basically, Prodigy comes out, and with the ref distracted by Jester, Prodigy hits Eaton with a super kick on the outside, making him easy prey for Jester to finish him off. A segment rating here of 63, a really decent match actually. Again, Jester keeps showing me that he's got something about him that's worthwhile running with, but I'm just struggling to find something meaty for him to get into. But I certainly need to take into account the performances that he's put forth as of late. Bobby Eaton 41, he's just a functional performer at the moment, really, Bobby Eaton. So next, backstage, Tony Schiavone is with Rick Steiner for an interview. And Tony Schiavone says that we're just 6 days away from Rick Steiner's no disqualification match with Goldberg at Starrcade, and he asks him how he's feeling. Rick Steiner begins to answer, but then Goldberg arrives on the scene and all hell breaks loose. Schiavone gets knocked down in the chaos. Goldberg tries to tear into Steiner, but Rick breaks loose, and then security and agents manage to hold Goldberg back. Steiner backs away but shouts to Goldberg as he goes that he's nothing but a little bitch. Goldberg tries to make a break from the grip that others have on him, but to no avail, and they manage to drag him away. So a really heated segment, this one, a 77, which is pretty decent as Goldberg and Rick Steiner, of course, get ready to face each other at Starrcade. The next match sees Sting and Ric Flair against the American Mavericks, and Sting and Flair win when Ric Flair pins Chris Harris after 11 minutes and 58 seconds. Segment rating here of just 58. Harris and Storm are just not really at the point where they've got enough popularity to carry this to something else, whilst Flair and Sting performed really well. 71 and a 72. I've got to be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed in this. I thought it'd be a little bit better, and I'm hoping that the competitive nature of the match, which is something I specified in the booking and the agenting of this match, will hopefully help popularity of the American Mavericks. But a rating of 58 is not terrible. Okay, so next, Sharma Sullivan is backstage with Lex Luger, and she asks for his response now that it is 100% confirmed that he and Buff Bagwell will defend the tag team titles against Sting and Ric Flair at Starrcade. Luger says that everyone will notice that Bagwell isn't here right now because he asked him to let him do this interview on his own. He says he has something to say to Sting, man to man. He says that they have been on a long road together through their careers, and though they may be estranged at this current point in time, they are brothers. Luger says that he wants Sting to look at the man stood next to him this Sunday night and ask himself if he really trusts him. He says for all the things that Sting dislikes about him, Sting always knows where he stands with the total package. But can he say the same for Ric Flair? Luger says that Flair has always been a selfish narcissist who looks out for number one, and he will use Sting just as long as he needs to and then betray him just like it's always been. He says to Sting that he's telling him this not to play mind games, but this one is brother to brother. Do not trust Flair. So segment rating here 54. This is not a good segment, unfortunately. I was really hoping for this to come across much better. Um, Luger was terrible with no script to follow, and Sharmell Sullivan was also performed poorly. Still got a rating of 54, but yeah, I was hoping for this to be better because this was this felt like a promo that really would set the scene for the match at Starrcade with potential concerns about whether Sting could trust Flair and Luger almost being quite honest and truthful with his friend Sting. So next we have Alexis Lurie versus Kana in a bout that had terrible wrestling and non-existing crowd heat. Kana defeated Alexis Lurie in 7 minutes 27 by submission. This wasn't a bad match. Segment rating of 29, better than most women's matches we've had so far, and that's entirely down to the fact that still the crowd don't have a lot of interest in these wrestlers. I think mainly because we're still not featuring them enough. I thought this might do a little better though because we've had Lurie and Kana in a mixed tag match on Nitro previously, so the audience have had a chance to get a little bit more familiar with them, but all the same, didn't perform quite as well as I'd like, but kind of gets a big victory over her rival Larry here. So before we get another break, Mike Tenay says that he is getting reports of something going on in the back, and he believes Goldberg may have gotten his hands on Rick Steiner again. He then throws to Charmel. Charmel is running along with a cameraman, reporting as she goes, and says that it is chaos backstage at the moment. When she arrives at the incident taking place, it is Vampiro, Jester, and Prodigy who are putting the kicks to Kurt Hennig. Eventually, Bobby Eaton and Jim Duggan turn up and Gothic Collective flee, but the damage has been done. We then go to a break. So segment rating here 50, as we're trying to portray the sense of chaos in the backstage area with Vampiro, Jester, and Prodigy here attacking attacking Kurt Hennig, and Bobby Eaton and Jim Duggan sort of turning up to get rid of them. As we come back from the break and Bobby Roode makes his way to the ring, the announcers comment on the absolute carnage going on backstage, and Tenay apologizes for the misunderstanding about Goldberg and Rick Steiner and says we're getting a lot of confused messages from in the back. Lawler comments that they are, for once, safer at ringside this week. They then also add that this is the latest in Bobby Roode's open challenge matches, and his open challenge this week comes from Shane Helms. And in a match that went 9 minutes and 20 seconds, Bobby Roode wins using underhanded tactics. This is a big victory for Bobby Roode. Segment rating of 57. Roode gets a in-ring performance of 36, as we're really trying to build him a little bit here. Shane Helms a 56, and yeah, a decent little match here between these two. It's next time for the main event of the evening, which sees Konnan and Eddie Guerrero against Jeff Jarrett and Brian Armstrong. Jarrett and Armstrong get the victory in 16 minutes and 53 seconds when Jarrett pins Konnan. Brian Armstrong is the weak link in the match, a 47 in-ring performance from him, but look at Guerrero at 79 and Jeff Jarrett at 82, so he's performing so well at the moment, Jarrett. A segment rating of 74, really satisfactory main event here, despite us not actually using any of our true main event talent. So very, very pleasing indeed. But we're not done with the show, because next we have the Booker T and Scott Steiner weigh-in. Tony Schiavone, who's still a bit flushed from earlier in the night, makes the introductions for the official weigh-in for the Starrcade main event on Sunday. He says that for a match of such importance, the WCW board decided that a public weigh-in would make for a great spectacle, and then introduces the men who will face one another. First, Scott Steiner is brought out, and then the defending champion. Eric Bischoff asks Steiner to stand on the scales that are in the ring, and after a few moments, Tony Schiavone announces that Steiner is at 276 pounds going into the contest at Starrcade. Then Booker is motioned to the scales by Bischoff, and he stands on them. Schiavone announces that Booker T is 256 pounds. Eric Bischoff then tells both men that following the disorder at last week's press conference, WCW have taken an injunction against both men to prevent any physical contact between them until the bell rings on Sunday night. He then hands the microphone to Booker T, who tells Steiner that in 6 days' time, all the talk is done. Steiner will have no more ammunition to fire at him, and he just hopes that on Monday morning, when Steiner looks in the mirror, he can live with it. Just as Scott Steiner is about to respond, a large group of men struggle through the curtain, and it is revealed that Goldberg and Rick Steiner did indeed manage to get their hands on each other backstage, with loads of security, agents, referees, and even some wrestlers holding them apart. Booker T and Scott Steiner look at each other and realize they are unable to get into a physical confrontation with one another, and so both leave the ring and run towards the melee. As they are making their way up the ramp, Mike Tenay apologizes to the fans at home, but that WCW is out of TV time and reminds them to join us on Saturday for Starrcade on pay-per-view, and the show fades to black. So a segment rating here of 85, and it features a lot of the big names, obviously, ahead of Starrcade: Goldberg, Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, and Booker T. Everybody looked good apart from Tony Schiavone here, apparently. And I just really liked the idea of the visual of like Booker T and Scott Steiner looking at each other in the ring, knowing they can't fight because of the injunction against them. And so then running towards the melee almost without themselves even knowing what they're going to do. And then the camera having to fade to black because we're out of TV time. So the last image you see is Booker T and Scott Steiner making their way towards this massive melee. I just quite like the idea of that. Obviously, in the in the arena, we then have to do something to kind of keep everyone apart and maybe cooler heads prevail. But I just like the idea of this kind of almost cliffhanger ending, which didn't feel too convoluted to me. It um, felt reasonably realistic, so I quite like that. So that is the end of a pretty good Nitro, an overall rating of 74. It increased our popularity pretty much everywhere. Some really good matches. Obviously, the main event was really good. The opening tag team match was also really decent. A little bit of nothingness in the middle, and I think this is. I think this was a. I think my booking for this wasn't particularly good. I think we were in a position where I was trying to save obviously all the big matches for Starrcade, and just I think the Booker T Scott Steiner feud for me almost ran out of steam as we got to the final sort of build for it. So thankfully, Starrcade is here and we can finally pay off this feud between the two. Anyway, before we get to talking about our next episode, let's do Saturday night. Okay, so as you can see for the taping here, we've attracted 3,420 people to the arena, which is really decent in the Northwest, which of course is not our home region at all. And the show begins with Tony Schiavone and Stevie Ray talking to camera and reminding everyone that Starrcade is just one night away, and they run down the card. It will see WCW World Heavyweight Champion Booker T defend against Scott Steiner. The WCW World Heavyweight Tag Team Champions Totally Buff take on Sting and Ric Flair. A no-holds-barred match between Bill Goldberg and Rick Steiner. The WCW United States Heavyweight title match between Mike Awesome and Lance Storm. The WCW World Cruiserweight title match between Rey Mysterio Jr. and Billy Kidman. Eddie Guerrero versus Jeff Jarrett. And just recently announced a pair of multi-man tag matches. It will feature the franchise players as well as Bam Bam Bigelow and Kanyon against DDP, the European Union, and the Wyndham Brothers in a 10-man tag match. And then in a 6-man tag action, the Gothic Collective will face Kurt Hennig, Jim Duggan, and Bobby Eaton. That is the full card for Starrcade, and that's what we've got to look forward to in the next episode of this series. Segment rating here of 46, but nothing specific, just these two talking about Starrcade. Next, we have Reno versus Mike Knox in a match that goes 7:58 and is won by Reno after using a foreign object. It's an abysmal match according to the game, and yes, a segment rating of 19, really, really poor. Reno has barely been featured, and Mike Knox has been only used as a jobber, so unsurprising, really, that wouldn't be a very good match. Immediately afterwards, however, uh, the vigilante makes his first appearance in front of a crowd and he gets in the ring, confronts Reno, and then chokeslam him before leaving just as quickly. A segment rating here of 22 as the vigilante has arrived in WCW. Next, we see Amazing Red defeat Jimmy Jacobs in 7 minutes and 4 seconds by pinfall. A segment rating here of 22. The Amazing Red had an in-ring performance of 31, Jimmy Jacobs of 23. We're at the point where these individuals that were involved in the Hot Prospects tournament are coming up for renewal in terms of their contract. Of the 8 that we signed, I think we will be keeping 3 of them, and one of them is the Amazing Red, so he gets the victory here. So next up, Sharmell is backstage with Nick Gage, and Nick Gage is looking very happy with himself. Sullivan asks Gage about his hand in helping the Headhunters defeat Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk on Nitro a couple of weeks ago. Gage says that with that loss, it is now official that Dreamer and Funk are done. They are no longer relevant. He says that ECW is dead, their era of hardcore wrestling is over, and now he will take his place as the true king of violence. So segment rating here of 33. Nick Gage kind of mouthing off about Dreamer and Funk. We still don't really know where this is going. I've just basically been winging this whole storyline right from the start, just to kind of fill time on shows. But it's kind of taken some twists and turns. We've obviously introduced the Headhunters as a consequence and done various other bits and pieces, and who knows where this is going. So next is the final match in the women's round robin, and it sees Jazz taking on Jillian Hall, which Jazz wins in 7 minutes 46 and wins the WCW World Women's title in the process. A segment rating here of just 18. Jillian Hall was really poor. Jazz at 26, but still none of these wrestlers have any real investment in them from the crowd, and that is definitely a failure on my part. We just haven't given them enough kind of exposure. We haven't given them enough angles. We haven't given enough promo time. We're gonna in 2002 we're gonna really kind of slim down the field of women and hone in on some very specific stories and feuds and matches rather than what we've done over the course of the last sort of 7 months in game time. And then we have a video package which airs past encounters between Billy Kidman and Rey Mysterio Jr. and also chronicling their partnership over the past few years. This is a segment rating of 58, and it's just a way to kind of hype up a little bit their match at Starrcade. And then the main event of WCW Saturday Night sees the FBI take on Lash LaRue and Jason Jett. The FBI win this in 13:58 when Frankie Cicero pins Jason Jett. Get a segment rating here of 46. Maritato of 50, Cicero 37, Jet 40, and Lash LaRue 37. With Maritato seeming off his game, which might mean that this could have been better had James Maritato been more on it. But that's the end of Saturday night. A pretty throwaway episode, ultimately. I mean, as I said, we are very much at the point where we just want to do Starrcade now. We just want to get it done. And I think I plan the way I book all of these shows is I kind of plan out um, the whole month's worth of shows in advance. But I think I just had so much kind of waiting for Starrcade to happen that it was really difficult to get big um, four big episodes of Nitro and Saturday Night in before then. So it's done now. Starrcade will be next, and I'm really looking forward to bringing that to you in the next episode. Just a quick look at Raw before we go any further. It was apparently very, very good. Kane and Kurt Angle defeated Big Show and The Rock in a 100 rated match in the main event on Raw. Strangely, though, the show rating was still only 90. And maybe that's due to the fact that in the semi-main spot, the Ultimate Warrior defeated Kevin Nash to retain the Intercontinental title, which got a rating of 76. So that is what Kevin Nash is doing. Who is Rodriguez? Chris Benoit defeated Rodney, who is now Rodriguez apparently in the WWE. That's interesting. And also Dean Malenko defeated Disco Inferno to retain the light heavyweight title. So Disco Inferno has been picked up by WWE as well. Another wrestler, of course, that we released earlier in the year. And that apparently is a new match of the year candidate. Kane and Kurt Angle against Big Show and The Rock. So we'll see. I guess we'll see pretty soon, to be honest. What I intend to do is kind of do Starrcade, obviously do the episode for Starrcade, and then we'll do a kind of year in retrospect episode. We may do more than one depending on what I choose to cover. I'm thinking about doing 1 year in retrospect about WCW and then a year in retrospect about the whole game world more broadly. And then we might take a little bit of break after that, but I think I've decided I'm going to continue into 2002, but it will be after a little bit of a break and give me a chance to kind of stockpile some episodes so that you're not waiting for really long for the episodes to come out. So, yeah, that's my intention going forward. For now, though, this is the end of the episode. As I said, next time it's Starrcade, so make sure you click the subscribe button to not miss that, as this is the culmination of the first 42 chapters of this entire series. But until then, thank you very much for watching.